So I'm going to be going over the trade I took Friday morning on the indices, and we have NQ right here, ES right here, YM right here. So first on the hourly, right, we had these equal highs coming into Friday, New York Open, right? And we had news at 10, and this was the Jackson whole synopsum symposium. So we had news at 10, which was the main factor that created this humongous bullish candle right here at 10 a.m., right, that you see. But first things first, on the hourly, right, we had, let me see if I can get it. Right, so on the hourly, right, we had daily SSMT here on the weekly cycle. So what that means is that Wednesday's low on NQ and ES was not taken out, right? After Thursday's close, right? So the Wednesday low was not taken out by ES and NQ, so that's SSMT right there, right? Sequential SMT. If you look at the Dow, Thursday took out Wednesday's low, right? So that's this low right here, and that's this low on NQ, this low on ES, right? So after Thursday closed, right here is the open of Friday, right? So after Thursday closed right here, we did not take out this low on NQ and ES, right? But we took it out on the Dow, right? So that's SSMT, and usually there is SSMT at the weekly high or low of the weekly cycle, right? So that was one bullish factor right there. So I was assuming that we were gonna return back into the range Friday because usually that's what Friday does. It likely returns back into the range. Because if you're looking at a candle, right, power 3 aspect, you have accumulation, manipulation, distribution, and then the last factor of power 3, which ICT doesn't like add into power 3, is that there is sometimes retracement slash reversal. So of the weekly candle, you're expecting some sort of like return back into the range of 20%. ICT does talk about that with his TGIF model, where Friday returns back into at least 20 to 30% of the range. Now this returned way past it. ES actually took out high of the week, NQ didn't, and the Dow took out high of the week and went back to all-time highs. But so that was the bullish factor right there. And then another thing that I saw in that hourly was these equal highs, right? So on NQ you have these equal highs right here, right? You have relative equal highs right here on ES. And then YM has all this liquidity that has not been swept out, right? So coming into 9 a.m. here, right, over here on the Dow, you had this high hadn't been taken out, this high, and that was all just liquidity from the previous day just sitting there, right? For anybody that was in short positions. So all this liquidity, all this buy side liquidity is just chilling there. So that was my draw on liquidity for the day, right? But the actual setup was taken here. So if you can see here, right, there was SSMT in the morning session with NQ being the weaker pair, the weaker asset out of the indices, okay? So the 90-minute cycle low was right here, right, on NQ. Oh, sorry, it was right here. It was formed right before the cycle closed, right? So the 90-minute low of the cycle was right here, right? However, this one just, NQ just wicked it, right? The 90-minute cycle low on ES is down here, right? So you were already looking for some sort of SSMT to be formed, right? And then the 90-minute cycle low on YM was right here. So you could see that NQ took it out at 9 a.m. once the third quarter started for the 90-minute cycle in the morning session. NQ took it out. So you're already looking for some sort of SSMT, right? But now you also need a lower time frame SSMT, right? So between Q4 and Q1, you can see down here on the smaller boxes, Q4, right? The Q4 low on NQ is right here. What happened? Took it out, right? Q4 low on ES is right here, right? what happened? ES took it out, right? And then the Q4 low on YM is right here. And what happened? YM also took it out, right? So there's no SSMT there, right? Because all three assets took out that Q4 low, right? Now where the SSMT happened was the Q1 low, right? So you can see here Q1 low of the 90-minute cycle for 9 a.m. to 10:30 was right here on NQ, took it out, right? 90-minute cycle low on ES was right there. YM 90-minute cycle low was down here, right? So you could see that NQ ends up taking it at 9:30, right? But where is ES and YM at 9:30? ES is right here at 9:30, right? 9:30 opens, ES is up here, right? YM at 9:30 is all the way up here, right? This is 9:30 open on YM, this candle right here. So you can see that there's SSMT here, right? Because YM's all the way up there, ES is right here, NQ is down here, right? So NQ took the low, closed below, right? The Q1 90-minute cycle low. So now what you're looking for this to validate a trade setup, now you have the 90-minute cycle low on the 5-minute, and then you also have this micro cycle low on Q1 of the next Q3 90-minute cycle, right? So you have SSMT between the 90-minute previous cycle and the 90-minute Q3 cycle, right? So that's 5-minute. You would be looking at this on a 5-minute time frame. You could see it better. You could see the Q2 low on NQ right here, right? Q2 low on ES. And the Q2 cycle low on YM is right here, right? So ES did not take out the Q2 cycle low, which is this one right here, which is the 90 and SSMT, right? Now on NQ, the low is right here, right? But what happens? It takes it out, right? So now you have SSMT forming on the 90-minute cycles, right? So NQ takes it out here, but there was no lower time frame SSMT to validate this as a trade setup. Otherwise, this could have been a setup. However, there wasn't that 1 minute, right? So once you get change in state delivery, now that you have the 90-minute cycle and you have the Q1, Q2 microcycle forming SSMT as well, you get a change in state delivery. So your first change in state delivery happens right here on NQ. NQ forms this down candle, order block. NQ closes above it, right? The order block's high. So this gives you change in state delivery. Now you can market enter this, put stop below the order block or below the Q2 low, right? On ES, you don't get a change in state delivery till here, right? So once I saw this change in state delivery on ES, I took a trade on this retracement candle back into the order block because I set a limit order here, and it tapped it perfectly, right? That always doesn't happen. Sometimes it could come down to the open. Sometimes it could retrace further into this fair value gap right here. However, to get a entry, I enter off the order block high, right, for a long, and the order block low for a short, right? Because that gives me high RR, right? So this was my entry. Stop loss was here, right? Now on ES, my first take profit was those equal highs that we saw in the 1 hour before. So these were my first take profit levels right here. Now I entered ES too because it's the stronger asset between NQ and ES, right? I don't trade YM, so YM was the strongest asset out of all three of these, as you could see. This one went to new all-time highs, right? But the reason I did not take a trade on NQ was because it was the weaker asset. This took out the low, right, of the Q1 1-minute cycle right there. Took out that low, right? ES, you could see at 9:30 it was right here, right? And then you get a change in state delivery, validating that microcycle, right? So this right here is my first take profit at those equal highs, and then I let it run a little bit further. I think that there was more liquidity somewhere. that I set a second take profit at. Yeah, I set a second take profit right here at this high because this is a high inside of a fair value gap, so it's high probability that price is going to draw there because price moves for liquidity and to rebalance price. So that was a very good trade overall, but the reasoning behind it was this Q2 90-minute cycle and the Q1 Q2 microcycle of Q3 on the 90-minute cycle SSMT, right? So you have two SSMTs and you got to change the state of delivery. So that was my entry. Those are my take profits. You could have entered NQ2 right here. Stop right there. Now you could have set your order at the high of the order block, and what happened? The next candle after the closure above retraced back into it, right? However, if you went break even before that news candle, you would have gotten stop out on the retracement. However, I mean, this offered about 3.3 and a quarter R, right? So overall, this was like one of the best trades of the week. You could see like news literally just sent the market up, and that's because, excuse me, that's because of the higher time frame SSMT, right? Forming low of the week. With SSMT and quarterly theory, you're able to tell where news is likely to send the market. Because if you have higher time frame SSMT, and Day talks about this, that you can kind of predict where the news event, if there's a news event that day, will send price, right? So you had this SSMT right here, and then you had regular SMT right here, right? You can see on the 1 hour, YM didn't take this low right here, right? NQ and ES took this low. So you had regular SMT right here, right? So this SSMT and then this SMT caused price to go up. Nothing else. We were not likely to take this low because of the Wednesday Thursday SSMT, right? So that's why price went up, and that's why the news candle was bullish. Now, people say you can't predict, like what the news is going to be. However, with quarterly theory, and you could backtest it, Day talked about it too, and I backtested it myself. You can kind of predict with high accuracy which way the market is going to be sent because of news, right? So this was the trade that I took on ES, right? Probably the best setup of the day. And even though ES was trading above highs, this strategy still works, right? But you have to be entering off and change the state of delivery and order block, right? And you got it. The first one was right here on ES. So I entered off of that, stop below the order block, gave me the higher RR. Now your stop could also be here if you wanted it to be, because you're not anticipating, because of this Q2 on the 90-minute cycle, Q3 SSMT, you're not anticipating price to come back here, right, at all. Because if this SSMT is valid, then price shouldn't not be coming back here. Otherwise, that trade's invalid, and then you would be stopped out here. So that could have been a stop loss as well. But for the highest RR, I put it right here. All right. So that was the trade overall, and I'm going to put the actual recording at the end of the video, and you can see, how I was seeing everything when I took the trade. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll do more trade reviews.